comes a new challenger!
What's up YouTube, Challenger TCG is back with another video. My name is Villionaire and we've been dropping a lot of deck profiles lately and have seen people asking for videos on how to actually go about building their own Riftbound decks. So we decided to throw together a video explaining just that. In this video, we will discuss the ins and outs of constructing a competitive Riftbound deck, as well as discuss some of the more general concepts of TCG deck building like win conditions and how they apply to Riftbound specifically. Let's jump into it. Choosing a legend. In Riftbound, every deck building process will start with picking a legend card, which will always start in play. Your legend sets the foundation for the rest of your deck building process by showing you which domains you can include in your main deck and Rune deck. For instance, if you were to pick Master Yi as your legend, you will only be able to include Body and Calm cards in your deck. As of set 1, each legend in the game only has 2 domains, so picking a legend immediately narrows your card selection process quite a bit, as you only need to focus on 2 pools of cards rather than all 6. In addition, each legend has at least one ability printed on it. These abilities can fall into 2 categories that I like to call generic and build around. Generic in this context meaning that the legend ability is always able to be used throughout the game regardless of what cards you play in your deck. Example of generic legend abilities are legends like Annie, Ari, Lee Sin, and Misfortune. Build around abilities are the ones that reference specific mechanics or card types and cannot be triggered without specific conditions being fulfilled, such as a unit being stunned. Legends like these restrict your deck building a bit, as you will need to include cards that do specific things or have a specific keyword, or your legend will essentially have no text during the game. Ideally, these types of effects are typically a bit stronger than the generic ones, making it worth running the specific cards that interact well with your abilities. Examples of build-around abilities are legends like Leona, Teemo, Lux, and Set. Choosing a champion. Each legend must be paired with a chosen champion unit that will also start in play at the start of the game, though it is still considered a main deck card. This champion unit must share a name with your legend to begin in the chosen champion zone. Think of it as an additional unit card that starts in your hand every single game. Each legend has a champion unit in both domains, and picking which one should be your chosen champion ultimately comes down to which one you want access to play every single game. The energy cost of your chosen champion can also influence your deck building. Teemo, for instance, if playing Teemo Scout as his champion, might not need to play as many 2-cost units in his deck as normal, because he will always have access to a 2-cost unit in turn 1 no matter what. Kai'Sa will always have access to develop Kai'Sa on turn 2, so might not need as many turn 2 plays in their deck, and so on. The makeup of your main deck can also influence which champion you should play, so don't worry if you end up deciding on a champion after you have your main deck figured out. How do I win the game? One of the biggest mistakes I see new deck builders make in every card game I have ever played is not understanding how to construct a win condition for their decks. A common misconception amongst even seasoned card gamers is that a win condition is a certain combination of cards that win you the game on the spot if played together in a combo. And while that is in fact one example of a win condition, it is not the only one. A win condition can be defined as any game state that causes you to win the game. You can win games via the standard game mechanics, and that is still a win condition. The question you need to be asking yourself is how you are going to create that game state. When hearing people discuss deck archetypes such as aggro, midrange, and control, they are describing the ways in which these decks win. Aggro decks aim to make many early game plays and try to win as fast as possible by snowballing an early lead. Control decks, on the other hand, try to stop your opponent's game plan and extend the game into the late game, where they will have enough resources to play large units to wall off aggression and spells and gears to protect them. Mid-range, as the name implies, kind of falls somewhere in the middle of these two strategies. An ideal mid-range plan is to be able to have some early game plays followed by playing incrementally larger units turn over turn. Depending on which type of win condition you want to build towards will determine your card ratios during deck building. You need to visualize turn-by-turn scenarios that lead to your victory and build your deck around that game plan. A more aggressive deck, for instance, might want to play a 2-cost unit on turn 1 and follow up with 2 more 2-cost units on turn 2 to create a wider board state. Decks like these will want to have a larger amount of 2-cost units than the average deck, whereas a mid-range deck may want to play a 4-cost unit on turn 2 and a 6-cost unit on turn 3. Decks like these will want to have a more even spread of unit costs. Control decks such as Dazzling Aurora may play very few units at all, instead opting for early spells to prevent enemy units from scoring, or to channel runes to get to your late game plays sooner. The unique thing about Riftbound is that many of these archetype definitions are harder to apply to Riftbound than to other card games, at least as of set 1. In many damage based games like Magic or Hearthstone for instance, playing a lot of early aggressive creatures leads to a large amount of damage done in the early game. In Riftbound, however, no matter how many units you swarm the board with, you are capped at scoring only 2 points per turn. On the opposite end of the spectrum, because the only way to win games in Riftbound is by scoring points with units, control decks need to be running some amount of units and cannot construct a win condition with just spells and gear. And even if you run your opponent completely out of creatures with removal, there is no deck out win condition in this game, so you will still need to find some way to score points. This could change in the future, but with how the mechanics of the game are currently structured, these archetypes will likely be few and far between unless we start seeing additional ways to gain points or they introduce alternative win conditions. This essentially leaves most decks playing a mid-range type strategy. Building a main deck. Your main deck consists of 40 cards including the Chosen Champion card. Our suggested general guide to card ratios when building is that about half of your deck or more should be unit cards. Somewhere between 20 to 25 units is the average amount we are seeing in nearly every legend across the board in high-level tournaments. The only decks currently dipping far below this threshold are the only 2 control-style decks in the format, Dazzling Aurora and Big Mundo Teemo, which only run about 10 to 12 units. The remainder of your deck will mostly be spell cards and maybe a few gear, something like 10 to 20 spell cards and 0 to 5 gear cards. These ratios may change in the future, especially with new mechanics already announced in set 2, such as the equipment gear that acts as both a combat trick and a gear, but in set 1 there is not many high impact gear outside of Dazzling Aurora and Baited Hook, so it is not rare to see many competitive lists such as Kaisa which run no gears at all. Remember that selecting which cards fill these slots will often be determined by whether your legend is a generic one or a build-around. Generic legends can just throw in all the most objectively powerful cards into their lists and not worry about having to sacrifice synergy. Build-around legends like Set, who only interact with buffed units, or Leona, who triggers when an enemy unit is stunned, needs cards that buff or stun units in your deck in order to get value out of them. When starting to deck build with a build-around legend like Set, the first cards you want to look at in his 2 domains are every card with the word buff in the text, and with Leona you want to find all the cards that stun enemy units. Make sure you have a sufficient amount of ways to trigger their abilities before you start adding in all the generically powerful cards. Building a Rune deck. After constructing your main deck, it is time to put together a Rune deck. Each Rune deck contains exactly 12 cards which must be runes. These runes can only be of domains that match your legend. Each rune can be exhausted regardless of which domain it is to produce 1 energy that can be spent to pay cards cost regardless of what domain those cards are. Some cards will have power costs which require you to recycle specific runes of certain domains in order to play them. These power costs will determine what ratios in your rune deck will look like. If all of your power costs in your deck are just one of your domains, then there is no reason to run runes of the other domain. If most of your cards only have one type of power cost, or the ones in that domain have a higher power cost than the cards in the other domain, then you will want to do something like a 7-5 split. Or if your power costs need to start being paid early in the game, you might even want to go with an 8-4 or even a 9-3 split, which will help ensure that you are not locked out of playing those cards early when you need them the most. If your deck's power costs are pretty even across the board, then a 6-6 split should serve you well. Choosing your battlefields. When choosing which 3 battlefields you want to include in your deck, a good rule of thumb is to have a neutral battlefield, a going first battlefield, and a going second battlefield. Going first is a pretty large advantage in Riftbound, and there are many battlefields such as ones with conquer abilities that work even better going first, as you will typically be the first player to play a unit and to score, so you will always be able to be the first to extract value from those types of battlefields. These are not battlefields that you want to throw out when your opponent is going to choose to go first, as that means they will be the first to take advantage of those effects. You only throw out a going first battlefield after losing a game, as you are guaranteed to be able to pick to go first for the following game. Since you do not know who is going first or second in the very first game in a best of 3, the very first game should be the one where you throw out your neutral battlefield. Some of the best Game 1 battlefields are ones that only you can extract value from, such as the Monastery of Hirana in a buff deck. This means that even if you lose the dice roll and your opponent chooses first, you will be the only one able to extract value from this field, while to the opponent it will just be a blank battlefield unless they are on the same kind of deck. Going second battlefields, you would ideally like ones that offer more defensive capabilities like Reaver's Row, or fields that don't get value until later in the game like Hallowed Tomb. When selecting battlefields overall, the most important thing is to find ones that you can extract more value from than your opponent, whether that be because you got to go first or because it synergizes with your deck better than the average deck. Building a sideboard. We will likely cover sideboarding more in depth in a later video, but for the purposes of this video, I just want to explain what a sideboard is and how it relates to deck construction. In Riftbound, you are allowed a sideboard of exactly 8 cards. Your sideboard is a small external deck that you have access to in between games 2 and 3, in which you can swap cards from your sideboard with cards in your main deck to alter your deck configuration in between games. When building a sideboard, there is no generalized ratios to give, but instead the advice I would give you would be to try to add cards into this deck that help give you an edge in your worst matchups. If you are having trouble with decks with powerful gear, and you are a Fury deck for instance, you may want to consider adding some number of thermo beams to your sideboard. Or if you are a body deck that is tired of getting hit with Falling Star or a Cathian Rain, you should consider running some copies of Unyielding Spirit in your sideboard. And that wraps up our guide on Riftbound deck building. If this was helpful to you, or you enjoyed the video, give us a like. If you have any suggestions for future videos or things we could do to improve our videos, don't hesitate to comment below. And if you would like to see more content like this, please consider subscribing to our channel. We will see you again real soon. Challenger TCG now has a Metafy.
Wow.
If you would like to support our content so we can continue doing what we are doing, then please consider subscribing to any of our Metafy tiers. Not only will you be supporting more content like this, but you will also gain access to our community Discord where we do live streams, Riftbound product giveaways, host VODs of our competitive testing sessions, and offer one-on-one coaching sessions. The members of our team are seasoned veterans of the competitive TCG world and have seen multiple successes across a variety of games. We also have written deck guide content available for free right now, and will be providing additional guides at no cost in the future. So check us out, even if you can't subscribe if you are looking for high-quality competitive content.